Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Corporate Venturing Insider Series. I am so excited to have our super professor, Denis Charlebois from Santa Clara University. We got to know each other through one of our interns at TDK Ventures that was one of your students. And then we got a chance to get to know each other. I got a chance to even go to one of your class and share some of what we do at TDK Ventures. And our conversation have always been so interesting. I think that you can bring so much to the audience in terms of corporate venturing best practices, but also venture capital, entrepreneurship, and what does it mean when you're being acquired, and many other topics we will cover. But Denis, first, would you like to introduce yourself and your journey into corporate venturing?
Sure. Thanks, Nicolas. And it's great to be here. I always like talking a little bit about myself. My journey has been somewhat unconventional. So I'll start off. I mean, I've been around for quite a long time, as you can tell by the gray hair. I grew up in Canada, and that's where I took my undergraduate degrees in engineering. And once you are an engineer, you're really always an engineer. You never lose that. So what comes along with that is a kind of a pervasive curiosity of why things work, how would they work, and over years that evolves into not just the technical aspects but also the business aspects. And I think that's where I made an overt decision to get away from the technical side of engineering more into the business side of engineering. So so I started off in a Fortune 100 company, and I did so. I learned a lot of best practices over the 10 years that I was there. Now, at the time, I didn't know they were best practices because that's all I ever knew. But it's amazing how much of that best practice carried forward for many, many years in my career. So, I ended up. I moved to California for work, and again in technology. But then being at a school for a while was it creates some anxiety. So I decided to plug back into academia. I went through maybe 20 years worth of classes. I got a number of degrees, including a PhD, as a result of that. Just as a side note, if anybody on the call knows who Peter Drucker was, he's since passed away a long time ago. But he was chair. He wasn't the chair, but he was on my dissertation committee when I did my PhD. Really interesting person. Probably worth another podcast. Uh, Went through the technology ranks. It seemed like I was going smaller and smaller companies, primarily because large companies you tend to be more pigeonholed. As I moved on, I got to a point where uh, I wanted to work for a small company. This was right around the late 90s, and I saw a lot of opportunities in small companies. So I decided to work for a startup. And it was an existing startup. Incidentally, it was in the disk drive business. So we were making really small profile heads to prepare the disk to put on the disk drive. And a lot of that manufacturing was done overseas. So I got to spend a lot of time overseas with manufacturing and lots of interesting stories about moving a production line from Silicon Valley over to, in our case, we ended up in Bulgaria. So I spent a lot of time in Bulgaria trying to stand up a manufacturing line um, in a culture that wasn't really the same as Silicon Valley. So I spent probably 3 years over there just trying to get it to work. Um, so ultimately, I came back and got connected with a friend of mine who had started up an encryption company, and cybersecurity was always one of my passions. Got tinkered with it here and there. So I ended up joining the company, and they were working on something that was very hot. Just before the bubble burst back in 2000, it was enabling mobile devices at that time to be able to do VPN connections with the corporate backend. So it was a specific flavor of encryption called elliptic curve cryptography. Cryptography
Mm.
is all about math. Elliptic curve mathematics is very difficult, but the equations are very small. So it made it really easy to put it on a lightweight on a mobile device. So we went IPO. So I helped the company go IPO. I was in charge of corp dev in that company. So we acquired another couple of companies, one in Japan, one in Germany. And then when the bubble burst, everything just kind of went away. And so I ended up being an investment banker for a few years. I had done a lot of M&A work in the corporate side, but I had never been really happy with the service I got as a corporate customer of investment banks. So some friends of mine said, let's start up a mid-tier investment bank. We did that. We went out and serviced a whole bunch of mid-tier public companies with a very specific value proposition in terms of how we selected companies for them to acquire. And I learned in that process that most failures of in corporations acquiring companies largely stem from making the wrong choice of what to buy. So I've been around enough corporate executives to know that when deal fever happens, there's very little that can get in the way of the deal getting done. But the reality is, you need a framework for making these decisions. So I learned that through that as an investment banker. But then one of the companies that I'd been sitting on their board for a while, and they asked me to join the company and help take it from where it was, which was basically nothing, to getting it funded, getting first customers, getting some growth. And so I went through for a period of 8 years. I did 8 startups. So
Eight years, eight startups.
yes. So it was at a time when funding was very difficult. So I think 3 of the 5 shut down pretty quickly. There were 2 successes, 2 acquisitions. One was the one that I think is most interesting was the one we sold to Cisco. So that was back in 2007. So it was my first opportunity to be on the receiving side of an acquisition. And having been on the corporate side and having acquired companies, I learned a lot about what not to do, because large corporations can easily kill small companies if they're not careful about bringing that into the company. But Cisco had done a great job of building a virtual wall around their acquisitions to keep all of the people that would typically want to help you, but helping usually meant distracting you from your core business. Uh, so I think they did a really good job of building a process and a framework for onboarding acquisitions in a way that made sense. And it was a cookie cutter type of a process. They averaged about 1 acquisition a week. So over a period of yeah. And so they've done a very good job of trying to standardize on that. They don't make so many acquisitions anymore, but the ones they do make are very big now, which back then they tended to make much smaller acquisitions. So so all while I'm doing this, I'm starting to gradually um, keep my feet in academia, and I started teaching back in 2000, here and there, doing guest lectures. And then finally, I reached a point where I had an opportunity to join Santa Clara University, and been teaching marketing and entrepreneurship, and a lot of courses that are oriented towards uh, Silicon Valley, young Silicon Valley people that aspire to be entrepreneurs.
Okay, I think the audience now know why it's going to be a special interview. It's very rare for us to have people who have been on both sides of an acquisition. But I'm going to go back first to your track and to your journey. You mentioned about your engineering background, but
Mhm.
also your late PhD. And I have quite a positive bias on PhD because you need to be able to deep dive, build convictions, surface it, get challenged, peer reviewed, and everything else. What was for you the discipline that came from doing this late PhD, which is probably even more difficult with family and everything else? So, can you share a bit of what that late PhD brought to you?
Yeah, well, it was always the goal. So, I picked up a few other master's degrees before that, so I already had some momentum on the coursework. What really tested me was the dissertation, because all of a sudden you have no structure. You have a time period
Mhm.
you have to turn in. You're on your own. You assemble your own committee. So in so while I was doing that, this is where it got really interesting. So 2 years into it, I had been doing research on my subject, and my car got stolen, and all of my research was in the car. So, and this was, before things were online. So every bit of my research that I had for 2 years went away. So now I had to recreate a lot of that research, which was fine. So then 2 years later into the thing, the chair of my committee passed away. So I had to recruit another committee. Then I ended up moving to another city, so I had to finish it remotely. So it was very difficult to keep focused on um, getting this done in a reasonable amount of time with the degree of quality I wanted, while all of this was going around. Typically, half of the people that get their PhDs, do so at the expense of a lot of things in their life, including their relationships or whatever job they're working on. So you have to want to do it. It's not something you take lightly.
No, no, for sure not. And so the other thing which I find very interesting is you're teaching entrepreneurship. You've been an entrepreneur. You've joined 8 startups in 8 years. If you could go back to the moment of your first choice of startup, so what would you tell the younger Denis on how to select which startup to join?
Well, I think you often don't have much of a choice. I mean, unless you're doing your own startup, then it's your idea. So you can, um, you need to build some momentum around that idea. But so of the 8 startups, 4 of them were mine. I founded or co-founded. So so in those particular cases, it was my idea, and then I had to find somebody else who shared my passion because I didn't want to do it alone. You can do it alone, but I think it's always nice to have somebody you can count on. Um, so when you're choosing a startup to work in, what you want to do is look for something that's compatible with your skill set. Look for something that is an area where you may already have some expertise or you have a passion to learn in that. Um, you're going to get in a situation where you're going to have to wear many hats. So you may not be able to cash out on the startup, win big like the lottery, the financial lottery. But um, as far as a learning experience, the first one you do will be the most important because you will learn everything that you have to do in a very short period of time. And if it fails, you will learn how to fail. And failing in startups is one of the most important assets you will ever have when you move forward. I always said, as an investor, when I was doing investing, if the leader um, of the startup had not failed before, I would consider that to be a disadvantage. If you
Mhm.
had failed, then I would ask, what did you learn from the failure? Because failure happens for a lot of reasons. So so I would say expect failure, but learn from the failure because this won't be the first time. If you either are going to love startups or you're not, and if you love startups, you're going to end up doing more startups. And so the first one is always the best stepping stone.
Now, you mentioned two success out of the 8, and of course, the most notable by Cisco. Can you maybe share? I mean, it's clearly not the same as today, but can you share how this was? How did it even start, the conversation of an M&A? It's not like a cold email.
Right. Well, it turned out that there was the way Cisco typically will look for acquisitions is they'll, like a lot of corporations, they have holes in their product line and they're looking for functionality that they don't have. So they'll go through a make, buy, partner analysis. And it was really through contact with one of our investors that had a prior company that sold to Cisco, that there was a connection there. So it was through an investor. They said, hey, we have this business unit in Cisco. They really like what we're doing. The fact that it was Linux based was something that was really important because they wanted to embed what we were doing in one of their router families. And so the connection was made, and then Cisco's style of acquiring is a little different than most. Uh, they will they will do all of their due diligence before they give you an offer, a term sheet. So
Which
you
can be
don't.
stressful, right? You go through all the heavy due diligence and you don't even know.
That's right. So we went through probably 6 to 9 months worth of due diligence,
Wow.
technical due diligence, business, customer, everything, and we didn't know we were going to get an offer, but you kind of they're not going to waste their time either.
Mhm.
So we were always floating trial balloons and trying to figure out what we get. But in the end, the offer was fair, and the once they made the offer, the time it took to close was very short because they had already done all the due diligence. They just had to say, "Okay, let's do it," and within probably 3 weeks, the deal was closed.
That's amazing. And would you say this is the best practice? Is this something which you would recommend corporation to do, which is to do the heavy work of due diligence up front? Or if you could, you would do it kind of in between? Or how would you
Well,
recommend in terms of spectrum?
Well, I think it's a choice. Okay, if you're a large company and you have a lot of market leverage, like Cisco did, you can do that and get away with it. If you're not such a large company, it would be difficult for the startup to feel that they were being, um, that they were wasting their time.
Yeah.
So I think both paths are viable. If you get to a point where you want to get a term sheet on the table quickly and then do all the due diligence later, I've been down that path too. And it's it. I would say that it's a different path, different anxieties. Um, the disclosures you have to do through the due diligence are a little bit different than the ones you do when you're getting to term sheet. So I would say that neither is better than the other. They're just different.
Okay. And so was any of the due diligence or the 3 weeks after the offer was made, was there any good practice in terms of preparing you for a good onboarding? Or was the onboarding only from day one after everything is closed?
Well, I mean, there was probably the week before it closed. They started spinning up the onboarding machine, and the first part of that was uh, had somebody come in and talk to us about what the onboarding process would like. We were assigned an ombudsman who was
What?
an ombudsman, basically a go-between. It was somebody that Cisco assigned to us that would be our single point of contact for everything, for finance, for manufacturing, for security badges, for knowing where the bathroom is, all of that.
Oh, I see.
Now, and so it helped us navigate the complex organizational structure. Plus, they also helped insulate us from some of the other people that wanted to spend time with us. Like the manufacturing people wanted us to move our manufacturing into their standardized manufacturing operation, but we were not ready to do that. And we weren't
Mhm.
using Cisco platforms. We were using a competitor platform, so that didn't sit really well. But they were able to keep us focused on our business. The platforms weren't the issue, and in the end, where they weren't after us for the hardware platforms we ran on, it was the software, and they always knew that software would end up being used in other parts of Cisco. Typically, it was in the router family. Their telepresence business was being incubated at that time, and a part of the technology we built was used to help telepresence deal with high definition video and low bandwidth environments. So it was I think if I were to advise any company who is acquiring, you really need to have somebody like that. That was probably the best thing they ever did, was assign us that one person, and no matter what happened, we always knew who to go to get an answer.
To me, it sounds like really a golden nugget. It's like, in a way, a membrane which only lets through what you need, but protects you, allows you to grow at the pace you were supposed to grow, No, this is a really good best practice.
Well,
Now,
the other thing too is that part of the acquisition deal is that we run an earnout. And you can't really enforce earnouts if you absorb the company too quickly because success or failure may be because or in spite of anything you do. By leaving
mm,
us alone, they allowed us to continue our business the way it was and to exercise the earnout that we all wanted, and ultimately that worked out really well for everybody.
yeah, and if there were too much interference, then you could argue they prevented you from
Ex-
earning the earnout.
Exactly, which is now these days why you don't see too many earnouts because I think corporations are getting wise to the fact that if they're going to buy the company and try to integrate it quickly, earnouts are a waste of time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, no, I understand that. Now, one thing you said earlier, which I want to double click because it's so important to talk about failure, and we don't talk about failure enough, I think. But two things you said, I think one is that more failure comes from making the wrong choice, and I think here there is some effectiveness hint which I want to touch about. And the second you mentioned, which I think is maybe even the next level up, which is you need a framework. Do you mind exploring and going further on this failure concept?
You're talking about the failure of picking the wrong company. So,
Yes.
so uh, oftentimes, and even in large companies that I continue to have relationships with, the selection of an acquiring a target is often done through a relationship between two people in the company. Um, it isn't done strategically. It's done through relationship. There is, let's say, a particularly a like or dislike for the company, the brand, and um, and that's okay. But the problem is that if it doesn't fit into a strategic framework, then what you risk is spending a lot of time and energy, um, getting to a point where you realize it's not the right choice, but you're so close to the end, you just do it anyways. So what I always advocate is that you need a corporate framework to say, okay, what are our strategic goals? How much of that is organic? How much of it is through corporate development? What methods of corporate development can we exercise? It's acquisitions, it's investments, it's spinoffs. All the things that help execute the strategy. But if you don't have the strategy, you're flying blind.
Yeah.
And there are CEOs out there that have had great success just picking companies because it feels good. Um, that's not a really good mechanism, and I think most boards are looking at the mechanisms that are there. It's easy to take a technology company and justify it because the technology is cool, but you really have to look at it more than just the technology. You have to look at, what are you buying? Are you buying just the bits and bytes? Are you buying people? Are you buying access to a market that you don't have? Um, yeah, look at the culture. Those things matter. It doesn't matter how big or small the company is. It matters. So if you're going to be successful, you have to take all of your acquisition choices and make sure they're aligned to your strategy, and then make sure that for each of these acquisitions, you have a standardized framework to put them through the assessment. Um,
You could even argue that without a framework, you can't even set the right valuation, risk adjusted valuation, because what's the value to you once it's acquired?
well, there are a lot of companies that will do that they don't care because they will overprice the acquisition because they know that it's easy to make the acquisition look accretive on paper. Because if I've got a whole bunch of salespeople and you don't, then if I bring your technology in and I give it to my salespeople, that's going to quadruple the sales that you would have had. So it's easy
On
to
paper.
on paper overpay. And while some companies still go back and check, most don't do that anymore because they realize that 9 months, a year downstream, um, the things that you thought you wanted out of the company may have changed. The causality of if I did this, like we said with the earnouts, some a year later, you may not be in a position to judge whether or not the acquisition was successful at all because you've integrated it so much it's changed. So a lot of the KPIs and metrics that are put in place to judge the success or failure of acquisitions, they're not very good. And I think that's an opportunity for improvement for people in that business to provide better KPIs and metrics that actually matter and are resilient over the life of the acquisition once it's acquired.
So let's talk about KPIs, because one is you've been on the both sides of an acquisition, but clearly on the acquiring side, you've also been an investment banker. So what do you think would be the right direction for a meaningful KPI for an acquisition?
Well, the only thing that matters is, does it add to customer value some way? Does it allow you to do more for the customers you have? Um, does it, and that may be expressed in a customer experience. So, customer experience, does it drive business growth? Does it reduce cost? The
Yeah.
rest, I don't really, in my mind, it doesn't really matter. So now I realize that if you say drive growth, well, there's 1,000 things that can drive growth, and trying to connect the dots to say this one acquisition you made help drive growth, it's hard to say. But I think everything you do has to has to be focused on doing the things that matter. So the big buckets. If you can say that we grew 5% and we had an acquisition we made 12 months earlier. That's good. We acquired somebody, we got growth. You can generally say what's organic versus not organic. And maybe it's because you made three acquisitions too and they all contributed, but that's okay. You don't have to, it's not an exact science.
So, so I think it's also a golden nugget, because I think what you're saying is don't even think about an acquisition specific KPI. Look at the acquiring company KPIs, the real business, and how does an acquisition improve these company-wide KPIs. But don't try to look at what the KPIs for that acquisition should be, because things change anyway.
Well, I think I think it's okay to have them, but don't obsess about them because they may or may not become meaningful over time. So if you want to say, well, we're going to bring you in and we're going to reduce your costs by 50% over the next year, and we'll do that in these particular ways. Great. That cost may not show up because it's three decimal places to the larger
Mm, mm, mm.
corporation, but it's meaningful for making sure that you integrate an acquisition the right way. It may be that you're reducing lead times. It may be that you're improving customer service. It may be that the velocity of your release development is increased from twice a year to four times a year. Those things are matter. Um, Even if they don't necessarily point directly to one of those big KPIs.
Yeah. Now, there is also something else you hinted when you said the team has worked so much on an acquisition, they feel like they have to go through, which is a sunk cost. And the concept of it doesn't matter how much time you spend on something, if it's not the right thing to do, you shouldn't do it. But we're all humans and we feel like we have to do it. Is there any best practice that you found can counter this desire to close when it's really sunk cost?
Yeah. Well, the if it's a large acquisition, then it's really the board that has to step in dispassionately and look at all of the information that's presented and in a strategic framework, um, and either give it a thumbs up or thumbs down. If it's a small
Mm.
acquisition and it's at a business unit level, um, it's going to be really hard to get in the way of that because they will once they get their deal fever going, then there's hardly any way to stop that. And so if I was the corp dev part of the organization and business units were targeting small companies to buy, I would require that they hand that off very early so that the corp dev people can process that, not the business units, because let the business units come in and do the technical due diligence, but don't involve them in the acquisition process because they will find every reason to make it happen because they made the choice.
And they may have fallen in love too. So if I think about us as VC, sometimes we fall in love with the entrepreneurs and we want to invest and we start to be more irrational than we should be.
Yeah, it's some of it is unconscious. They don't realize they're being irrational, but they are, and they can put up very good arguments why the deal should go through, but there's only a few things that you need to really look at as to whether it's the right deal. Um,
Yeah.
because by doing that deal, it means you're not going to be able to do other deals. Um, and if you go down and do the due diligence and you get to the finish line, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Then there has to be somebody that's not connected to that due diligence to come in and make that decision. If it's at the term sheet side, you've got a little bit of wiggle room, but uh, I would say that every acquisition that's put on the table should go through a vetting process before you start down that path. Because if you're going to invest the energy as a corporation to do the due diligence, you want to get to the finish line. You don't want to go and spend $100,000 and a team of people for 6 months and then find out we're not going to do it. And when you find something out at the end that you should have found out at the beginning. So and it takes about as much time to do due diligence on a big company as it does a small company. So
Mm,
uh, you 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 don't want to waste that if you don't have to.
yeah. And it's very difficult to right size a due diligence anyway. You want to be thorough.
Yes, but this is where the standardized processes and templates and questionnaires really do help. Even though being on the receiving side of some of that, they're really annoying, and they can
Yeah,
they can distract you from your day-to-day business. So when that happens, if you're the startup and you're being acquired, you have to find a way to insulate your people from that. And it's easy um, to consume all of the energy of the CFO and the CEO of that startup, and they're not paying attention to customers, and that's their primary job.
I think that's another golden nugget, which is really isolating your team that still needs to deliver on the startup's mission while having parallel discussions about M&A. Because if that M&A doesn't happen, you don't want to have compromised your startup's
Right,
progress.
and you have to be conscious of the fact that part of the one of the key functions of the CEO is to fundraise. So if he's not fundraising and he's going off trying to sell the company and that doesn't work out, then there could be a problem. Generally, he's not doing that without the backing of the current investors. So what I typically do is explore with the investors the what if scenario. What if this doesn't work out? Um,
Mm,
you know, what's our funding situation going to be like? What's our runway? How much more money? I mean, should we have something in the pipe that, in the event that the deal doesn't happen, we have at least a path where we can get additional funding?
very nice. So I'll use that as a segue to go into the investor side. And maybe we'll work backwards, which is let's just before the M&A, because we just talked about it. How do you work as an entrepreneur with your board and with the investors? What best practices would you suggest when you are in an M&A discussion? Because some investors do want the M&A, maybe some because of where they are on the preferred stack prefer not to. And the entrepreneurs themselves may actually be conflicted depending on where they would end up on certain numbers. Is there any best practices from your experience you would share about how to handle an M&A discussion with investors and all the dynamic aspect that comes with it?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. Actually, it's not always a situation where everybody agrees. You
Yeah.
could have three investors, and one of them wants to hold, wants to build to the next level of value, and then think about it. And then the other ones may just want to cash out. So, at the end, you need some consensus because what you don't want to do is go down a path where, um, if it's one board member and you're outvoted and they're outvoted, then yeah, you could do that, but you don't want to be in the position where it's forced down their throat because then
Mhm.
you could have legal repercussions as well. So I would never start down that path unless I had a tacit agreement from all the investors. And if if one was more enthusiastic than the other, but the other was said, okay, I'm not going to be the odd man out. I'm along for the ride. Let's see how much it's worth. lots of opportunities to back out of the deal, but I wouldn't start that journey unless everybody felt that it was either the right thing to do or potentially the right thing to do.
Very nice. And now I'm going to again go backward, which is about selection of the investors. And of course, let's assume you're a startup with choices. So you're one of the big, amazing success, and investors want you, which means you can choose. Uh, let's go at the highest level, which is when would you choose a VC versus a CVC or a mix of them?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So first of all, I mean, choosing a VC is like choosing a mate. You are you have to approach it like you're going to be married to this person. So you better get along. Out of the, you better have something you both bring to the table that's of similar value. You want to make sure that it's not just the money, that there are other things they can bring, and you want to have um a relationship with these investors where they can expose you to other customers through from other investments they have, that they can bring in functional support where you need to, and are they in an industry that aligns with where you want to go,
Mhm.
and do they and their vision as a venture capital firm, what's their track record in taking these small companies? Are they ones to do multiple investments and then try to roll them up, or are they like 3-year folks? Are they early stage, late stage? What's their track record of success? Um, all you have to put on the table is everything you have about that startup. It's a success or failure. Now,
Yeah.
if you're going to syndicate, then I generally will let the VC decide who should they syndicate to. But I want to make sure that whoever they syndicate to, that I engage with those people as well, and I understand their motivation. Everybody wants to make money, sure, okay, but this is only going to happen if we all get along. Um, and if they have some access to some, let's say, domain expertise, let's say advisory board members that might be useful for us, that's great, because those are the types of folks that can get us indoors. Now, when it comes to corporate VCs, uh, so I've never actually had a situation where I've had a combination of corporate VC and regular VC.
Okay.
Generally, the corporate VCs, uh, my side of it is that they focus on investments that align with their own um, portfolios. Rarely do you get a corporate VC that will invest in order to diversify out of their backyard. That does happen, but it's unusual. So you're typically filling a hole in their product line, giving them access to maybe a geography, maybe certainly giving them something they don't have, that they have decided that the best thing to do is to buy it rather than build it, because it will take too long to build. Um, Now, as a startup, I realize that by aligning to a corporate VC, I may have to compromise my vision a little bit, because now that I have somebody that is investing in us, that wants us to become a certain type of company, a certain technology. Um, it's it uh, You want to make sure that you align on that, and it's not a surprise after they give you the money if they want you to go off and do something. Let's say in mobile, where you weren't in mobile and you didn't want to do mobile, then you need to know that beforehand. Um, so I'd say that corporate VCs can be the best match of anything, because you're typically joining with them not just for the money, but
Mm.
for something bigger than just the financial exchange. You're looking at a potential acquirer. You're looking at
Mhm.
somebody that has a vested interest in your specific domain. Whereas the VC, they're just in it for the money.
Now, let's double click. You select the corporate VC or the lead investor does because of some financial but also non-financial benefits. How do you maximize that value? How do you ensure that you get the value you expected? Because not every corporate VCs are the same. So there are clearly some maybe warning signals or maybe best practices you want to share
From the corporate VC side or from the entrepreneur side?
from the entrepreneurs looking at the corporate VCs? And I'm looking at this because I think corporate VCs need to have empathy towards the entrepreneur, and they need to have these best practices built in to make sure that when they do invest, they bring value. And to do that, they need to understand the entrepreneur's decision making in a way, or what should be their decision making.
Yeah. So, so whatever that corporate VC has done in the past matters. So you have to look at past practice, and I would go to other companies they acquired and ask questions about what it was like to get acquired. What do they do with you after they acquired? Uh, were you happy with the post deal integration? What was the level of support you got internally? How much did you have to compromise your vision in order to match up with their strategy? So I would want to make sure that those questions were answered both by the corporate VC and other people that had been acquired.
So, due diligence your investor.
Yeah, I mean you do the same thing with venture capitalists. The only thing
Yeah.
you may not do is you may not have as strong a strategic fit because in the corporate VC world, they may keep you as an investment for 10, 12, 15 years, okay, and let you evolve and feed you things that you can do and then internalize that technology without actually going through the process of buying you because you're performing really well as a startup. If the IP is able to be transferred into the corporate VC, then you're getting most of the benefit of that without a lot of the cost. Uh, so that's actually not a bad way to do it. The corporate VC, I mean the regular VCs, they have a timetable for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, with all you know, if you were to create, and here I'm going to choose on purpose Cisco, but if you were to create a corporate VC for Cisco, knowing how good they've been on M&A and the corporate development team, and of course, I'm not asking anything that's confidential or that's current, but really at the highest level of abstraction, what would be the top 3 or 4 things you would be thinking about creating a corporate VC?
Well, so so there has to be kind of a strategic charter for the corporate VC. It's to do something important for the company. Um, the financial part of it matters, but not to the extent that it compromises the strategic reason for doing this. Now, once you have that strategy and you all buy in, then I think you need to operate the corporate VC as if it were a separate entity, almost like a venture capital firm on its own. If you don't do that, then um, you risk compromising some of the decision making because you're letting a lot of the corporate decision making process get in the way of what typically venture capitalists have to do. They have to take more risks. Um, they're it's a different culture. So you need to be able to operate somewhat independently. Not like you're going to go off the reservation or anything or go rogue,
Mm,
but things that relate to financial decision making. How do I write a check? How do I buy services from a third party? If you're constantly going back to the mothership and having to use their purchasing department or their finance department, it just slows everything down. So,
yeah.
so it's I hesitate to use the word subsidiary because even in subsidiaries you have corporate governance. I'm not saying have no governance, but the best possible way to do it is to act independently, act like a VC, run lean and mean, run fast. The successes should be brought back into the VC organization to fuel other investments. The acquisitions that are made as a result of the CVC, some of the proceeds of that should go back into the CVC organization so they can grow as an independent investment entity.
I think you've given one of the best explanation I've heard, which is start. I mean, I've heard it in different ways, but I think you've really explained it from a sequential point of view, which is start with a strategy. what's going to move the needle for that corporation, and then allow for the independence or autonomy to the extent they can be a good VC, but with a link to that strategy. And I think most people typically likes to propose both at the same time. And I think that if you're not in agreement with the strategy, there is no point to talk about all the logistical aspects.
Well, it's going to be painful for many of the executive leaders because they are going to want to exert control over the CVC organization, and for all the right reasons, but they can't, they shouldn't. And if they do, it's going to compromise the speed and efficacy of the CVC organization as a whole.
Let's double click because maybe we'll have some of the CEOs of corporations thinking about creating a CVC. And you're right, the top management, corporate officers, head of business group might want to influence that CVC. And you said for the right reasons, and yet it would be impacting negatively the potential of the CVC to bring that strategic value. And can you explain that disconnect? Because I think that for the audience, that's actually probably the biggest golden nugget.
Well, first of all, there's a cultural distinction between the type of way that you manage a CVC versus a regular organization. And I would say if you've ever read Jeffrey Moore's book Zone to Win, it paints a really good picture of how large organizations need to subdivide into these different zones. And one of the zones that is often overlooked is the incubation zone. And he makes a really good case for why that incubation zone needs to be um, not disconnected, but operate independently, separately, different culture, different people, different processes. So, can you do it without all of that? Sure, okay, but I strongly believe that you're going to little by little infiltrate the culture that makes those types of investment organizations successful, and you're going to make it less successful.
Actually, I like to think of incubation the same way as nature, which is you need to create additional protections because incubation, the start of innovation, is so fragile. And if you try to impose a big company structure on something that's very fragile, it's very likely not to survive.
Right, exactly.
Now, I want to ask, maybe looking back at your career, maybe one of your biggest challenge and what you learned from it.
Well, different parts of the career, different things. I think what I've learned along the way, and we were talking earlier about, detours. So
Yes.
when you're looking at your career, it's never a straight line. Um, to your point, you said earlier, sometimes you don't see how the dots connect until, you're 20 years later, you see how it all threaded back. But detours can be really healthy. They can give you a new perspective. They can allow you to learn things that you never would have thought would be useful. And then as you come back, maybe on the different path, and maybe the path that you always wanted, you're bringing experience into that that role that you would not have had otherwise, and it makes you a better person. Overall, the things that I think are in the startup world, the thing that's most challenging is to get collaboration. You spend 99% of your time trying to figure out how to get things done by influencing other people. Some of it is people in your startup. Some of it are your investors. Some of it are your customers. So there's this collaboration, communication, influence part of your job that it needs to grow over time, and you have to get better and better and better at it. Um, you you have to make sure that you fight the right battles, the ones that are worth winning. Um, you certainly don't have to be the smartest person in the room. In fact, sometimes it's better that you're not because um, you want to learn. Every situation you're in, you want to be learned. In large corporations, it's harder to get away from the politics. Politics, the way that in my experience, the best way to diffuse politics is to act in the best interest of the customer. So when you have the voice of the customer or are acting on behalf of the customer, all the other things don't matter. whatever opinion somebody has about something and the way to do it, then if the customer's voice always wins. So you learn how uh, to lead, to act, to work as an advocate of the customer in your organization. And if you do that, it's a lot easier.
It's always is. Actually, I do like the discussion we had about the tour before the podcast, because if we think about diversity of thoughts, which drives better decision, the more detour you had in your career, however weird they might look at the time, brings you a different way of thinking, which you add to the team. And you could argue that when we interview and when we recruit people, we should really be excited when we see a detour and try to understand what was behind it. What does it bring to the team? So I also believe that detour are part of what makes individuals a stronger contributor to a team.
Right. Yep. And I think there's some kind of things that the students in my class that are interested in becoming entrepreneurs, the first thing I say is that uh, I can teach you how to be an entrepreneur, but I can't make you an entrepreneur. That has to be in your DNA. Because it's to learn the process and to try it. There's so much about it that is just hard on
Mm.
your life and everything around you that it's something you have to want to do. Uh, so, and they often come to me with ideas, and what I tell them is, great ideas are fine. There's a lot of great ideas out there that from uh, from somebody that has been in a startup who has invested in startup. The idea is actually the least important part of it. It's the team and the ability to execute. I'd rather take a mediocre idea and a great team than a great idea and a mediocre team any day of the week. Um,
I agree. And anyway, from a great team, you're not going to get mediocre idea anyway. It would be at least good idea. But I think what's interesting is that the starting idea is likely never going to be the end business.
exactly. Yes. Yeah, the days of getting an idea and going to stealth mode for 2 years, nobody does that anymore. Unless you're in biotech or something where it matters a lot. Uh,
Yeah, I think, but here biotech is very different in that you know the end point. But I think your point is that when you're uncertain about the market, the use case, the business model, the technology, and everything, it's very likely you need to pivot the wrong the way. And the team being capable to do that and to listen to the signals is way more important than the starting idea.
yeah. Well, and that's one of the things we teach. Even though we require our students to bring a plan, a business plan, the business plans don't have a lot of utility in startups, other than the fact it forces you to think through processes. Who's your competition? What's your go-to-market? Um, but ultimately, things change so quickly that you really have to be prepared to pivot, and not because not out of defense, but because it's the right thing to do. You'll put things in front of a customer, and they will, they'll give you great feedback, and then you give them exactly what they asked for, and they don't want it. So you have to be able to navigate all of these different pivots. But this is the whole thing about doing the lean startup. Okay, is that it's iterative, and you want to keep doing that over and over and over again. Um, but always keeping the customer kind of the centerpiece of all of this navigation.
And also, I mean, you talk about lean startup. The value of that methodology is that you're testing hypothesis of the highest risk first. You're not testing randomly. You're looking at what is the highest risk I need to test next.
Right, right. And something else that might be worthwhile is, especially with engineers, is they tend to overthink a lot, um, and they pride themselves on how much they can confuse the people they talk to. So it's their source of power. Uh, so what I always tell the students is that first of all, communicate with people like you're talking to a third grader. If you can speak about complex ideas in that way, then everybody will understand it. Um, and analysis. The whole analysis paralysis part of it. I always say that overthinking issues is the hobgoblin of getting things done. That I would rather get it 80% right in half the time than 100% right in twice the time.
Yeah.
So don't look for precision. There is no precision. There's no precision in markets or no precision in customer needs. Speed and agility make all the difference in the world.
So, and maybe this is towards my last questions, but we've concluded on the importance of the entrepreneur, the team. When you meet entrepreneurs, and you said you're born on that entrepreneur, but or the DNA of the entrepreneur, how do you tell, especially across your students, who's going to be a great entrepreneur? What are the early signals you can see, and what are they?
They're passionate about whatever
Mhm.
it is. Now they may not have a great idea, but you can see the passion in whatever they're talking about. That they are um, they're people that get things done. So talking about getting things done is different than getting things done. So the people, the doers, are the ones that move the needle, not the people that talk about what they're going to do. So they're action oriented, they're passionate, and they are uh, capable of, they're good communicators, sometimes great communicators, and they're able to influence people. Um, so that's just a few attributes. There's a lot of entrepreneurs that are egotistical maniacs, and you never want to be in the same room with them. That's okay. Some of those people do quite well alone because they have the capacity to be alone. They never ask for an investment. They bootstrap everything, and they tell customers that they're crazy because they're asking for something that is not what they're building. I know a few of those people, and some of them have been very successful. But that's the exception. Most of the good
Yeah.
ones are really good communicators. They lead with empathy. They lead with passion. They get
Mhm.
things done, and they don't sweat the small stuff.
Yeah. And part of the communication, I think, is the importance of being a good storyteller. And it's not just towards investors, but customers and recruiting the first few team members. I mean, I remember when we had lunch together, storytelling is clearly something that is so critical.
Yep. Yeah, that's something we do teach when we teaching how to pitch to VCs. It is all about the story. So if you don't have a story and it's threaded through everything, then things tend to fall apart in small pieces. So you're absolutely right. Storytelling is one of the most important parts of being an entrepreneur.
Well, Denis, I really appreciated your time today. I think you've shared quite a few golden nuggets, and I think your varied experience brings even more contrast to what is typically more 2D topics. So I really appreciated your time today. Thank you.
My pleasure.